Hello and welcome to the Bayside Sermon Series podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Duckworth, Media and Technology Director here at Bayside. This week we discuss with Pastor Dave 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. We hope you enjoy our conversation today. All right, welcome back to the podcast. This week we are with Pastor Dave, and we are in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, discussing what elders must be. As we usually do, we're going to start with a couple questions from the congregation, but this time I want to save a few more questions that directly relate to the discussion points for the week. And before we get too far into it, I want to remind people how to submit a question. There are two ways. On Sunday mornings, if you're in your sermon notes, if you scroll to the bottom of the sermon notes in the app, there's a link there. But recently, we have also added in the landing page of the Bayside app, if you scroll about 2/3 of the way down, there's a separate link that says Submit Sermon Question. Click that link, fill out the information and your question there, and send that in to us, and we'd be happy to discuss those things. All right, so let's get to one of the first questions. One detail that was not mentioned in the sermon was how Bayside functions with the length of term for elders.
So our elders are elected for a 3-year term, which can be renewed after the first term. But then after 2 terms, elders are required to take a year sabbatical. It's not that they quit being elders, they're just not actively serving. At least they're not attending elder meetings. Most elders, even in their sabbatical year, are still serving somewhere, teaching a class or being involved in various ministries, but they're just not actively required to attend elder meetings during that year. Almost always, after a sabbatical year, elders are invited to come back and serve again. The way we look at it here is that once you're an elder, you're always an elder, whether you're actively serving as an elder at the time or not. And so we've got, in addition to the 9 elders that are currently serving, there are 4 or 5 other men in the church who have served as elders in the past, and we would still regard them having that kind of standing.
Another question was about the process of removing or correcting an elder if they are no longer fit to serve.
Right. So the Constitution spells out very clearly ways that an elder can be removed, whether it's for a doctrinal error. It could be because of failure to fulfill the responsibilities of an elder. Or it could be disqualification based on something they've done that they no longer fit the qualifications of eldership. And it basically just requires a vote of the elders to discipline an elder, to remove them from office. I suppose if there was somebody in the congregation that had an issue with an elder, that they could bring that to the attention of one of the pastors or the other elders for them to hear and, if appropriate, investigate and substantiate whether the charges are true.
And finally, the Apostle Paul is a good example of this. Before his conversion life as Saul, he had a not so good view from people in the church. So if someone having a severe conversion where their reputation before that was awful in the community, but through that transforming power of Christ has become very different, yet memories from the community are long persistent, would Bayside still see this person as not meeting the qualifications? Because having a good standing in the community is one of those qualifications listed in Timothy.
Yeah, a good reputation with outsiders is the last of the qualities that's listed there. And the answer to that is that we do have on our elder team some men who became believers later in life, who had pre-Christian histories of addiction, whose children in some cases might be estranged because they remember Dad when Dad was drunk. But again, the transformation in life has been so dramatic. And over a period of time, again, they're not new believers, but over a period of time, they've demonstrated that they truly are transformed in Christ. And so, we're not going to be bound by grudges that people might have or old knowledge. I think when we are asking, what's this person's reputation outside the church, we'd be talking mainly about people who have current knowledge of that individual, and certainly with the elders in our church who had significant, difficult pre-Christian histories. If you ask people who know them now in the community, a lot of times what you hear is, well, he used to be this way, but wow, he's a different guy today. And that we would take as an indication of, that person has a good reputation in the community and obviously is demonstrating the transformed life that they now have in Christ.
That those life experiences they're using to help others.
Exactly.
And lead through those difficulties.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, let's get to our discussion points. Having instructed women in chapter 2 that they are not to teach or exercise authority over men when the church is gathered, Paul goes on to give the qualifications of the men who should teach and exercise authority. In chapter 3, he refers to them as overseers, but other places they are called elders or pastors. So you kind of gave a reference to this on Sunday morning. Talk about some of those differences and how they each apply.
Yeah, so you have this list of qualifications for overseer in 1 Timothy 3. You have a very similar and mostly overlapping list in Titus chapter 1, but there Paul uses it to talk about, the elders you appoint should have these qualities. In 1 Peter 5, he talks about the shepherds who are over you, and he calls them elders and the work of shepherding they do. So there are three basically interchangeable words that are used to describe the highest level of church leadership. Overseer, which has to do with those who oversee the work or manage the work of the church. You have elder, which has to do with the spiritual maturity that's required to exercise that office. And then you have the word pastor, which simply means shepherd, which again is descriptive of the work they're to do, caring for, feeding, leading, and protecting the sheep, the flock of God. So three interchangeable terms. Interestingly, different denominations have camped out on those different terms. So the word for overseer is episkopos, and the Episcopalians claim that. And so they have an episcopal form of leadership, and they say, no, the top tier is not the local church pastor or elder, but is the bishop. So they have bishops. And then you have the Presbyterians who latch on to the word presbyteros, which is the word for elder, and they have a Presbyterian form of government, which means that the local church is governed by local elders. And that's basically the kind of governance that we follow at Bayside. We're an elder-led, elder-governed church. So that's why the elders, the overseers, the pastors need to be chosen so carefully.
Question 2. You broke the qualifications into 3 groups. There were 15 qualifications. And questions 2, 3, and 4 talk about the breakdown of those 3 groups. And before we get into those separate groups, there was a question about some people that were keeping track of the numbers here, that there were 7 virtues, 4 things to avoid, and 3 tests, which math says that's only 14. So can you give us clarification on that 15th point?
Sure. Let's start with the 7 virtues. So in verse 2, he's got 7 virtues: above reproach, husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and able to teach. And then I said that in verse 3, he says, okay, now here are 4 excesses that an elder must avoid. So the first one was not a drunkard. The second was not violent, but gentle. So it's that contrast that gives you the 15th. You kind of sneak a positive one in there among the negative ones. So not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, and not a lover of money. So there's the 4 excesses to be avoided with one other virtue that gets snuck in there, gentleness. And then 3 tests he must pass. Is his family life healthy? Is he a new believer? And does he have a good reputation outside the church?
So going back to the virtues, you ask in question 2 the importance of these virtues in a leadership. And so for us, we don't know all the eldership by heart. Not everybody can. Hopefully everybody knows at least one of the elders. So help us as we look at these virtues, the importance here.
Yeah, so the virtues that an elder must possess are really not exceptional in that all believers in various places are encouraged to emulate these virtues, to have these virtues. It's just that an elder should exemplify them. So if there's something that all believers should aspire to, there's something you should be able to see in an elder, because they're setting the pace. They're leading by example. Above reproach, you don't want somebody who's able to be accused of bad behavior. Husband of one wife, you want somebody who's setting a good example in marriage. They're loyal to their wives. They're committed to their marriages, not flirtatious or adulterous, but they're setting a good example of what a husband should be in a Christian marriage. Sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable. That all speaks to wisdom and the kind of wise and well controlled life that an elder leads. Clear-headed, not given to extremes, sensible, well-behaved, and hospitable. Literally lover strangers, and especially important in the first century when Christians traveling from place to place relied on the hospitality of other believers. And again, that's something that church leaders should set an example in. And then able to teach, which is so critically important, because not only are elders responsible to feed the flock by declaring God's word, but they're also responsible to protect the flock, which means that they guard against doctrinal error. And so they must be individuals who are well instructed in the scriptures and are able to instruct others from them.
Question 3 was dealing with the 4 excesses that an elder must avoid. And the question is how these excesses get in the way of someone leading a church well.
Yeah, well, you can well imagine if you had an elder who was given to drunkenness, who was addicted to alcohol or drugs, that would make it very difficult for them to give direction to others if their own life is out of control and under the influence of alcohol. We're to be led by the Spirit, be under the influence of the Spirit, not under the influence of alcohol. And so if a shepherd's always getting drunk or high, he's probably not going to do a good job of caring for the sheep, feeding the sheep, leading the sheep, protecting the sheep. Not violent, but gentle. So this is not somebody who's a bully, who's given to verbal or physical violence, but somebody who's characterized instead by patience and tenderness. And as I said on Sunday, it's got to be frightening to sheep if their shepherd's always screaming at them and beating them. Good shepherds lead their sheep; they don't drive them. And so, if a shepherd is given to violent outbursts or violent behavior, that's not going to go well as far as the sheep are concerned. Not quarrelsome, not contentious. If a church leader is one of the kind of people who seems like they're always looking for a fight, always looking for an argument, and is unrelenting in their opinions and won't give in until they win the argument, well, that's not likely to go well either. Elders need to be team players, working together to shepherd the flock, to lead the flock. And if there's an outlier among the shepherds who's always going the other direction, that's going to be very confusing and divisive where the church is concerned. And then not a lover of money. Well, there are all kinds of ways you can get in trouble with money. From embezzlement to ostentation. I talked on Sunday about this Instagram site, Preachers on Sneakers, and the outrage that this one guy stimulated by simply posting pictures of pastors and worship leaders dressed in extravagantly expensive sneakers and other attire, and how that kind of excess is sort of, well, it's contrary to, I think, what a shepherd should be conveying in terms of humility and even care for the poor. So these four excesses are all things that could not only disrupt the life of the church, but could lead people astray. If by example, a shepherd is a lover of money, well, he's likely to lead his people into the love of money. And by the way, you can't serve both God and money. If you're violent and not gentle, if you're quarrelsome, if you're a drunkard, well, those are all things that are destructive behaviors. And if that's the example you're setting for your flock, then it's going to be disastrous.
Right, and some of those sound very connected.
Yep.
When you are inebriated, your guard can be down, or you can be led into anger, making poor decisions, leading into being quarrelsome. Being a lover of money is not something that's new to the church.
Right.
That is something that built St. Peter's Basilica on the backs and the fears of the people, and the pastors or the leaders of the church wearing gold and big hats. That's nothing new.
Yeah, Søren Kierkegaard has a passage in one of his works where he talks about the state church in Denmark, and he kind of describes the bishop emerging from the chancel, decked out in these gorgeous robes of crimson and all festooned in gold trim, and he's got this mitre on his head that has all these expensive jewels, and Kierkegaard says, and then he has the audacity to get in the pulpit and say, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God." And Kierkegaard says that the strange thing is that the people don't burst out laughing because of the contradiction, So this has been a critique of church leaders for a very long time.
The fourth question. In verses 4 through 7, you identified the 3 tests that an elder must pass, and why we think that it's important that the elder passes each of these tests. Now, one of these tests comes from verse 4, where he must manage his household well, or as the King James Version would put it, one that ruleth well his own house. And some churches that I've had personal experience will include how the man manages his wife as well as his children in regards to verse 4. So where do you believe that we should be drawing the line between normal child disobedience and household being out of control? And how does that relate to how he treats his wife?
Well, I don't necessarily see the wife in verse 4. I think that the way that Paul qualifies the first phrase of the passage, he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. I think it's speaking there primarily of his role as a father. So I wouldn't load, ruling his wife in there with the way he leads his children. And there's a very specific reason given for that. Now, we're not talking about, as you pointed out, not normal childhood disobedience, but I think we'd be talking about, how there's some people who just don't have their kids under control. Their kids just run wild, and they're never disciplined, and they're disrespectful, and if that's what's happening, and dad isn't doing anything about it, then Paul says, you probably want to look for somebody else to be an elder. And the reason why is because he says, if a man can't manage his own household well that way, how will he care for God's church? So there's the argument from the lesser to the greater. You're going to have a bit of an insight into how well this guy is going to do as a leader in the church by how well he leads his family, his children in particular, keeping them under control and disciplined. Now, I think that there are some sects out there. I just watched a documentary on a fundamentalist sect where basically dad was encouraged to beat the children until they obeyed him immediately without hesitation. I think that goes contrary to what this verse is saying. It says, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. That's to say that dad keeps his dignity, maintains his dignity. He doesn't lose his cool, doesn't get out of control. So this is not a license for child abuse in the name of, got to keep my kids under control so I can be leader in the church. And there are a lot of pastors' kids who grew up with that stigma of being told that you got to behave, because if you don't behave, your dad could lose his job. And that's just really shameful for that kind of threat to be held over a child's head. Our kids would sometimes say, "Oh, you're making me do that because we're the pastor's kids," and Diane would respond and say, "No, we're making you do this because you're Dave and Diane's kids. It has nothing to do with your dad's occupation." And so I think it's just a matter of, healthy family life. Paul is very clear elsewhere. Fathers, don't be overly harsh with your children so as to discourage them, but raise them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Authoritarian parenting, I don't think has any place in this conversation. Parents need to be authoritative, but loving and nurturing, especially in the things of God. And I think that's how you get to what verse 4 is talking about, of a guy who, with dignity, keeps his children under control or keeps them submissive.
2 side points then. If God had not blessed this man and wife with children, does that disqualify?
That's a great question. And I think the answer to that is I don't think that's a disqualifier. I've had, we don't have any at Bayside presently, but in a previous church, one of the finest elders that we ever had was a godly guy who was never blessed with children. He and his wife were never blessed to have children. I think what you do is you take these qualifications and you say, as far as we can judge from this individual's family life, from his demeanor, even from the way he interacts with children in the church, I think there are other ways we can get at the answer to that question, even if a man doesn't have children.
Widowers?
Yeah, widowers the same, for sure. The husband of one wife thing is taken to an extreme by some to say that if somebody has been divorced and remarried, no matter the circumstances, they should never be an elder. At Bayside, we say, well, for some people, their divorce and then remarriage took place in their pre-Christian days. and this is a new man in Christ. He's a new creation in Christ, and so what's old is passed away, and what's new has come, and we judge by the status of the state of the man's current marriage. So we don't say no automatically to divorced people. Now, if somebody is recently divorced and the divorce wasn't in accord with biblical allowances for divorce and remarriage, then we'd probably take a pass on that person. But divorce is not an automatic disqualifier, nor is being a widower who gets remarried. Now, there are some corners where they would go so far as to say it doesn't matter if you've had more than one wife, you're disqualified automatically, and I don't think that's the spirit of what Paul's talking about there.
It's very easy to get into legalism with these texts.
Yeah.
All right, our question 5 is a reflection question. How much difference do you think it makes whether or not a church has qualified leaders? Without naming names, thinking about your experience in churches where the leaders have not been qualified, thinking about your experience about the difference about the churches where the leaders were truly qualified. And for those that have not had much experience with church leadership in general or new to coming to church, we see similar issues in the secular workplace. And it's very much like being on a plane and the airline company fires the pilots mid-flight. You don't know where you're going. You don't know if you're going to get there safely. The people who know what's actually going on are no longer present. So it's a very scary place to be.
Yeah, leadership is really critical, and I think good leadership makes all the difference in the health of an organization, and most especially in the health of a church. And that's why Paul is so adamant to say, as you look for overseers, elders, look for these kinds of people. Anybody who's had much experience in church, if you have had a bad experience in church where, there was just a lot of griping or division or confusion about where we're going, or disagreements about, how the money's being spent, or you probably, if you scratch around a little bit, you're going to find that there's a problem with leadership there. And in a church, you're probably going to find leaders who aren't truly qualified. As I said in the sermon, I've been involved in church life all my life. And I've seen really bad situations. I've seen really good situations. And the really bad situations are typically churches that chose their leaders kind of casually, Hey, the bylaws say we've got to have, 4 new elders this year. Who are we going to get? And the nominating committee sits down in October or November and says, well, this guy's been around a long time, or that guy's a good giver, or, the pastor says, hey, I want you to, bring in this guy. He's a friend of mine. And those are situations where typically things don't go well. But in the 2 churches that I've spent most of my life in ministry, here at Bayside and previously at Grace Point Church in Pennsylvania, where we gave really serious attention to the scriptural qualifications of elder, and sometimes took a year or more to vet people and before we were 100% in agreement among the other elders that, this is somebody whose name should be brought before the congregation to be affirmed as an elder. The whole spirit, the tone of those churches was way different from any other churches I've ever been involved in. High degree of trust in the leadership. The leaders prove themselves worthy because they are qualified. They act and look a lot like Jesus, and they lead a lot like Jesus, and the church flourishes under their leadership. Here at Bayside, we just recently finished working through a book. Second time we've been through the book as elders. A book by Timothy Whitmer called The Shepherd Leader. And And it just really emphasizes that metaphor that more than anything else, we're not like a corporate board, although we are called upon to make decisions from time to time the way a board would. But predominantly, we want our elders to see themselves as shepherds, not executives over the church, but shepherds among the flock. And part of the way that our elders fulfill that responsibility is that, well, they're leading small groups and classes themselves, but each of them has 4 or 5 small groups or classes that they are to oversee, to be in touch regularly with the group or leader or teacher, and to visit from time to time those groups or classes, to get to know the sheep and to be present among them. Our elders are typically, though they're not on the platform very often, they're highly visible among the congregation, mingling with the sheep, and you'll sometimes see them taking somebody aside to pray with them, or just this last week I saw one of our elders talking to a younger man, and it looked like he was giving him a word of counsel, and so Peter's very clear. He says, that as we lead, we're not to lord it over those we lead, but we're to shepherd them. The way a shepherd would care for the sheep, leading the sheep, feeding the sheep, protecting the sheep, caring for the sheep. And I think we're really blessed at Bayside to have elders who really do those things.
The 6th point this week was, how do you think we should pray for our leaders at Bayside? And one of the big things that we need to be praying over is the search for an eventual transition to new leadership in the lead pastoral role. Right now, Pastor Ken and his family are going through a very thorough vetting process. And as I was typing it out, you can't spell thorough without spelling rough. Any specific prayers that the congregation should be bringing before the Lord?
Well, I think the search committee has been doing a really, really terrific job and spending a lot of time in prayer and conversations. And, I think that just pray that as this process moves forward, that God will continue to give really clear discernment. Eventually, the search committee will make a recommendation to the elders. The elders need discernment for that process. Selecting the next lead pastor for the church is one of the most important decisions an elder board will ever make. And then a recommendation would come before the congregation, and the congregation will have an opportunity to spend with the candidate in different contexts and formats, and then eventually we'll be asking the congregation to vote to affirm a new pastor. And so, this is a very important time for us as a church to keep cognizant of the qualifications of elder, pastor, overseer, because we certainly want to make sure that our next lead pastor, lead shepherd is going to be qualified in every respect.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. That concludes our time for today. Thank you, Pastor Dave, for joining us. Next week, we are finishing chapter 3 of 1 Timothy. Pastor Ken will be discussing the role of deacons.
Yep. It's commonly, might not be understood at Bayside that we have deacons and deaconesses, but we do. It's just that we don't have a deacon board, as some churches traditionally have had, but we do have people serving in the role of deacon and deaconess, and Ken's going to explain all that this week.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. All right. Thank you very much, Pastor Dave. We hope you all enjoyed our conversation today, and have a blessed week.